Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well, and it's time for another round of Seattle Seahawks predictions. And this time we are doing the inside off ball linebackers. We are doing the interior one or two linebackers that are typically between, in a 3-4 defense, between the edge rushers. So we are doing, of course, this year we welcome Bobby Wagner back to the fold. We welcome in Devin Bush. We don't know what we're going to get out of a guy like a Jordan Brooks because of the injury and whoever else happens to get involved in the party. So before I go through my player by player predictions for various statistical categories, a couple things. First of all, maybe more than any other position in football, these statistics are not going to do a full, they're not going to fully capture how good the player actually was. I think that for inside linebackers, you're generally speaking better off looking at things like team stats than individual stats. I think the individual stats get you part of the way there, of course, and there are some meaningful things you can glean from it. But probably more than any other position, except for maybe inside defensive linemen, you need to be willing to look beyond just the box score. Like, you guys know how I feel about tackle farmers. And there are some linebackers out there that farm tackles without actually having a big impact on the game. There have been previous seasons, like even as far back as 2019, where I've looked at Bobby Wagner and I've thought to myself, he's getting a lot of tackles, but is he actually having a big impact on these games? So understand that the box score, which is basically what we're going to be looking at here, is going to do part of the job, but you have to look at the bigger picture, and sometimes you have to really drill down into the granular statistics, like average depth of tackle, to get an idea of what we're actually dealing with when it comes to an inside linebacker. Second of all, I am aware that we are probably going to have some other players play a little bit inside linebacker this year. For instance, Jamal Adams, maybe Julian Love, maybe one or two other guys that I'm not even really thinking of, like Onu Giogu is an outside linebacker who played a little inside linebacker last year. Maybe that happens again. That may be the case, but for this video, we're just looking at the guys who are actually inside linebackers first and foremost. So let's get started here. Top guy is obviously going to be, who else would it be? Bobby Wagner. He is our top inside linebacker. He will be on the field for basically every snap, and because of that, he'll pretty easily lead this crew in terms of all meaningful statistics. Tackles, kind of tough, but I went with 135. When you take a look at last season for Wagner in LA, by the end of the season, he was basically the last man standing on that defense. Everybody else got hurt. So he was, to a certain extent, kind of able to farm monster numbers because there was less competition. Hopefully, that's not the case here in Seattle. I think that because there are going to be more players for him to compete with for tackles, including some really good ones like potentially Jamal Adams, Julian Love. Julian Love had a ton of tackles last year. He's always around the ball. Hopefully, Witherspoon ends up living up to the billing from his college days because he was a great tackler in college. I think there are going to be fewer tackles for Bobby to get, but I do think he gets up to 135, which would be really good. Even if he played in all 17 games, I would happily take that. Obviously, the question is how impactful will those tackles be, but just for starters, I'm going to say 135 tackles for Wagner. Tackles for loss, I'm going to say we get a pretty big step in the right direction from where he was last time he was here in 2021 when he only had a few. I said 7 tackles for loss. It's not going to be anything superhuman over the top, but it's going to be close to what he did last year for the Rams. I think there will be more plays in the backfield. There won't be a ton. I don't think our defensive line is good enough for there to be a lot of tackles for loss, but I think he'll be knifing into the backfield a little more than we saw last time he was in Seattle. Okay, Now, sacks, I don't think he's going to replicate everything that he did in LA last year. He blitzed a lot in LA, and he blitzed very effectively in LA. But it's going to be better than what it was last time he was in Seattle. I think his last year in Seattle, he had like 1 sack. Last year in LA, he got 6. I'm going to kind of split the difference here and say 3. I don't think we're going to blitz him as much as LA did. I don't think that's in our DNA, but I think we're going to blitz him more than we did previously because after what happened in LA last year, we should have a pretty good idea that that's a strength of his game, and we need to do it, or else what's the point of having Bobby Wagner? So I'm going to say 3 sacks. If we decide to utilize that skill set of his a little bit more, I think that it could easily get up to like 4 or 5, but I'll say 3 for now. And in a similar vein, pressures, I'm going to say 7, more than he typically got in his last few years in Seattle. Again, using PFR numbers here, but a little less than in LA last season. All right, so now let's take a look at the coverage stuff. This is the area where Bobby has really kind of made or broken his seasons in previous years in Seattle. Last year in LA, he did not give up that many passing yards, but it was because he wasn't in coverage as much. LA didn't put him in coverage as much as we did, and he didn't give up as much. He gave up like in the mid 300s. I think this year he will give up a little bit more, but it will be better than some of his previous years in Seattle. I said 454. I think the number goes up partially because I do like our secondary a lot this season. I think our secondary is going to be really good. And teams that go up against us are going to need to throw the ball because we're going to have a really good offense. What do you do when you need to throw the ball and you're facing a really good secondary like I think Seattle will have? You target the linebackers. And I don't know if Bobby's going to be a liability in coverage, but I do think he will get targeted a pretty good amount. And I think he'll give up somewhere around 450, a little over 450 passing yards. QB rating allowed, I went with 92.3. I don't think he's going to get destroyed the way that he did in some previous seasons. I don't think he's going to be amazing, but I think he'll be good enough. And given the fact that he's going to probably be the guy who gets targeted, I don't know if he'll get targeted the most on this defense in coverage, but I do think he'll get targeted a lot just because of how good our secondary should be. I'm willing to live with 92.3 all day. So that's a really good season for Bobby. That might get him to the Pro Bowl. That might get him an All-Pro second team nod. So, pretty good season. After that, it gets really hard, though, because next up you've got Devin Bush. And the question with Devin Bush is how much is he going to play? Because there's been a lot of talk this offseason that the Seahawks are going to use 3-3-5 a lot. And if we're in 3-3-5, that means Devin Bush is not on the field because you've got one inside linebacker on the field in a 3-3-5. So, that being the case, we obviously can't stay in 3-3-5 the whole game. But if we use it a lot, that means Devin Bush is only playing maybe 55 to 60% of the snaps, which is kind of what happened most of the year with Cody Barton. Cody Barton, you look at what Cody Barton did last season, there were some games where he played barely half the snaps. There were some games where he played, I think, like 35 to 40% of the snaps. So Devin Bush may end up kind of in that area where he plays a good amount, but there's a lot of plays where he's not on the field. It's not going to be like a few years ago when we had Wagner play every snap and KJ Wright play almost every snap. It's probably going to be more like Bush is out there for 65% of the plays. So with that in mind, I went with 89, which is still pretty dang good, and I would definitely be happy with, but he's not on the field every play. Tackles for loss, I went with 3. If you look at his time in Pittsburgh, he was never a big tackle for loss guy. He's a smaller guy, more of a speed guy, not necessarily somebody who's going to be able to take on blockers and win. That's not his game, so I'm not seeing a lot of action in the backfield for him. But at the same time, not bad, not something that I think is a problem. So yeah, I'm going to go with 3 for loss, and I also went with 1 sack. Some point this season, he just gets in there, gets his sack. It's not going to be a huge part of his game. We're not going to be blitzing him a lot. I went with 2 total pressures, so I don't think it's going to be an important part of his game. When you think about it, if he's going to be on the field during 2 inside linebacker sets, that means he's probably going to be dealing with more running plays than anything else. So I don't think he's going to get the opportunity to blitz a lot, but I went with 2 QB pressures. Just not going to be a big part of his game. In coverage, I went with 329. It's hard for me to get a feel for how good Bush is in coverage, but his speed and his agility should lend itself fairly well to being good in coverage, which is not really something you could have said for him in previous years, I think. But again, I think our secondary is going to be good. So when opposing teams need to throw the ball, especially at the end of the games, I think they're going to be targeting our linebackers a lot because our secondary is going to be pretty locked down, I feel like, with Witherspoon on board. And plus, you've got Jackson, plus you've got a good safety rotation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think he ends up getting beat up a little bit in that area, 329. Not bad still. When you look at how much he'll be on the field, that's fine. QB rating allowed, I went with just over 100, 100.2, which again, that's serviceable. I got no real issue with that. So those are your two primary inside linebackers. I do think both guys will have healthy seasons. I think that maybe like one of them, oh well, okay, I should say both of them might miss a game, maybe two. But I'm going to say both guys hold up and play basically the whole season. Which means there isn't a ton left for everybody else, but let's go through it here. Next guy we're going to look at here is Jordan Brooks. Now, we're getting mixed messages about Jordan Brooks. On the one hand, we're hearing that he's not going to play this season. On the other hand, we're hearing he is. And it feels like these guys contradict themselves constantly when it comes to Jordan Brooks. You had John Snyder say his timetable is about the same as Radigan's. Radigan missed a full year. But then you have other people acting like Brooks is going to play this year. So which is it? I don't know. Now let me be very clear. I want Jordan Brooks to either come back before midseason or not come back at all. I don't want to bring him back at the end of the year to play in a few games and get his contract to roll over. If we are going to not have Jordan Brooks for most of the season, then just have him IR'd so that way his rookie deal rolls over to the following year. However, I kind of feel like we're going to end up using him a little bit. I think we're going to slowly work him in over the second half of the year. That's the vibe I'm getting. And again, I want to stress, this is not my preferred path, but I went with 21 tackles. I don't think he plays a lot. Maybe at the end of the season, we see him play significantly in a couple games. But personally, I'm hoping he just doesn't play. That, to me, is the way to play this. I'm not a fan of Jordan Brooks, but he does have value. He is good at some things. And I'd rather have that rookie deal roll over an extra year so you get a restricted free agency season like we are going to with Darrell Taylor. Because Darrell Taylor missed his whole first year in the NFL. But I feel like we're going to use him a little bit. I said 21 tackles. I'm going to go with 1 tackle for loss. He's not going to play enough to get much more than that. No sacks, not a big part of his game. I do have 1 QB pressure. Just at some point he gets in there and harasses the quarterback. 87 passing yards allowed. He's not good in coverage at all. And 129.5 QB rating allowed. I don't think that injury is going to make him any better in coverage. In fact, it may make him worse, which is hard to imagine, I know. But not a big season for Brooks. Again, I'm hoping he can either come back by midseason or not come back at all. I want to see a lot from him or I want to see nothing from him. I have a feeling we're going to split the difference, which is not preferable. But moving along here, we got John Radigan. He's the next guy up. I think mostly a special teamer. On defense specifically, however, I think he at some point gets in 3 tackles and then really not too much of anything else. I think he just ends up playing a little bit of garbage time or spot duty, doesn't really do anything. I don't have him really getting targeted in coverage. I don't have him doing anything as a blitzer. He just gets in there for a little bit. And then the final guy we're going to look at here is V. Jones, and I think it's the case for him as well, even more so. He gets in there for a little bit of mop-up duty and garbage time, and maybe the last game of the season he gets to play a little bit because we've already clinched everything if we have. So I just went with a 1 tackle and really nothing else. And that's it. Those are your inside linebackers for the Seahawks, and these are the totals that I have for them. Would be pretty happy with all this, I think. As long as we can get healthy seasons from Wagner and Bush, and we don't have to test our very forgettable linebacker depth, we should be fine. I think Wagner has 1 more really good season in him. I think that Wagner can be about as good as he was last year. He'll just be used a little differently. I think that Bush can hold up in his role as a 65, maybe 70% of the time player, and I think that'll be good enough. So let me know what you guys think about these guys. See you guys later. Go Hawks.